I don't hold Bitcoin anymore. Bitcoin now represents why I got into the industry, not necessarily something that I'm going to die on the sword.
All right, we're live with the Zeall Show, episode 43. So, hi, Dave. How are you?
Good to be here. I was having, as you know, I was based in Hong Kong at the time. And people here back then would have a beer after market close, on Wednesdays, Thursdays, etc. So I think it was on a Thursday. I was having a beer with a friend of mine who was a quant at Goldman Sachs. He and I went to university together at Waterloo. And so we used to meet once a month and just chat about stuff in the markets and complain about work and whatnot. And this dude was like, hey man, I was reading this thing online called the Bitcoin white paper. Like, what is that? And he's like, you're the one guy, I think you're going to love it. Like, go home, Google it and read it. So I did, and I couldn't fall asleep. I read it and I was like, holy mother of God, this thing is going to change everything. They used to call me the Bitcoin banker. If any of your viewers care, they can Google my name, David Shin, and Bitcoin. They'll see I was in the financial media quite a bit.
I remember.
Bloomberg, CNBC's, like all that stuff, right? New York Times. And I took it as an opportunity, even though Ants and I knew I was at risk of getting fired and laid off.
I was worried for you, actually.
Yeah, as you're aware, the banks are heavily regulated, and me being a front office sales guy, they didn't like that. But I was willing to take that risk because I thought someone had to do it. Bitcoin now represents why I got into the industry, not necessarily something that I'm going to die on the sword for, because it's converted into an institutional money-making tool, which is exactly why I left banking. And yeah, it's going to continue to be that way. Now it's gone from being an institutional money-making tool to central banks are going to hold it as a reserve.
Yeah.
And so it's moving in the direction that I was hoping that it would move in. And I think a lot of us in the early days, we believed in Bitcoin because it was going to be disruptive to these institutions that are now holding it and hoarding it. And we used to talk about back in the day, like, Bitcoin is not good to hoard, right? And that's why I never really liked proof of stake, because the winners of proof of stake are the ones who hoard.
True.
Proof of work. If it wasn't for ASIC chips, the whole idea was that you would have equal distribution based on equal contribution of work across the network. But ASICs destroyed that model because humanity is greedy, and they'll find every way to mine as much gold as they can. So when we distill it down to the basic principle of why I fell in love with Bitcoin, and you fast forward to today, it's actually reverse engineered everything. And because of that, from my personal standpoint, like, I believe in the principles of Bitcoin, but I'm actively investing and taking positions on Bitcoin. I never really cared about the price because for me it was the whole ideology behind the tech, always was. And it's now in the hands of the greedy, Wall Street people once again. And it's unfortunate. It's in certain manner, it's almost sad.
Yeah.
Right? Because, here we are, we fought so hard for all this stuff, and decentralization to centralization 2.0. It's crazy. Yeah, so it's providing the context. I am an investor. I'm the first investor of a company that I helped set up there 8 years ago with a very good friend of mine who's Cameroon Canadian. And, this company is called Interstellar, and we ended up becoming sort of like what Consensus is to institutions, where they've been advising them about Ethereum, and Interstellar has done that for the African banks. You fast forward to today, Interstellar is the technology partner for the most powerful bank on the continent, which is called Afrixim Bank, Africa Export-Import Bank, which is the bank for the African Union.
Wow.
So we built we've built a marketplace called PAPS, PAPSS, where it's a B2B system where you can basically transact between two counterparties for cross-border settlement by using tokenized deposits on both sides and then swapping atomically. And what this allows the African continent to do is get away from SWIFT and the US dollar.
Wow. So what are in Africa? They don't like the SWIFT. In terms of liquidity, they have much less than other parts of the world. So it's also very hard for them for sure. But what is, like, on the ground, like you're saying, what is the actual challenge? Like, in terms of settlement time, it's definitely much longer, or are there other sort of challenges that you saw before you actually went in?
Yeah, I mean, people like to think that Africa is very corrupt and there's a lot of bad dictators, and there was. And I always remind people a lot of that was being funded by Western governments.
Yes.
To create instability so that they can come in and take their resources. But it's more to your point, what is the real on-ground problem? The on-ground problem is that even for people like you and I, so if I was in Zambia and you were in Kenya, and let's say you're a cousin of mine, and I just wanted to send you $10, right? I have to go through SWIFT. There is no, in Europe they have the US at ACH, and Singapore, they have FAST, and Hong Kong has Octopus and all this stuff, right? Africa, 54 countries, every single cross-border transaction, regardless of whether it's $1 or $1 million, has to go through SWIFT.
Wow,
which
that
means
sucks.
It sucks. So of money ends up getting trapped in different countries because they can't send it out, because it ends up depleting the value of that amount by the time it settles, because of SWIFT, but also because of the T plus timeline. Now, when people ask me, like, well, why does it deplete? It's because you're always having to go through an FX pair just to send money. You see what I mean? So again, let's say I'm in Nigeria, you're in Kenya, and I'm trying to send you like $5, 5 naira. That 5 naira, right, I have to go through the Naira US dollar FX pair to then send that US dollar across to the US dollar account in Kenya where you're receiving, and then there has to be another FX between the Kenya shilling and the US dollar. By the time all of that happens, T+3, and it lands in your account, it goes from $5 to $1. And the reason for that is because a lot of the central banks in Africa do not hold large amounts of US dollar reserve. So there isn't a lot of US dollars that's being floated with treasuries across the banks, and therefore it gets very expensive. So I'm sure you can work the math out, right? This becomes very, very problematic, especially if you go from retail level like $5 to I'm Dangote Group and I'm trying to send, or I'm Huawei Africa, and I'm trying to send from one of my locations to another location. It causes a lot of brain damage. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, so I was thinking, like, I know Interstellar is trying to do the instant settlement. Are you for the tokenized deposits? Isn't there a sort of still that you need to convert, or is it a direct conversion between the two currencies?
So the liquidity in today's traditional world, okay, because there isn't that much US dollar reserve on the continent with all the banks, comes from third-party vendors, brokers who provide that liquidity. But they still take massive spreads because they know that they need that US dollar liquidity. Here, what's happening is that because this marketplace, PAPS, is being pushed by the biggest bank, which is like the bank that all the other banks bank with, right? That's how big Afrixim Bank is. There's a certain amount of guarantee around settlement. But also they bring in a lot of proper third-party liquidity providers and incentivize them to make sure that people on the platform, i.e. the other banks that are doing these cross-border transactions, don't get stuck, right? So it's really interesting when you get into solving these problems with Big Brother, who needs your help to solve these problems, and all you have to focus in on is building them. Yeah, I've got two myself, and I tell them all the time, in the Marvel universe, right? The gauntlet, there's a lot of stones, but the one stone that's always featured in all the movies, including the Avengers, is a time stone. Time is the one resource that is actually more valuable than Bitcoin or anything else. And to use time, which you can never get back once you use it, in the right way, doing the right things and for the right reasons is really important, even at a young age, because as you get older, you can't get those years back.